Senior living operators face a complex set of challenges. How do you stay ahead of the pack? Listen in to From Leads to Leases, a CCR Growth podcast for expert solutions that transform problems into opportunities. And maybe someday soon you'll partner with us to generate $1.5 million and up in additional revenue per community in just 12 months. Welcome back to From Leads to Leases, the podcast where we delve into the intricacies of senior living marketing and sales, offering fresh insights and strategies from industry experts. I'm your host, Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth, here to guide you through the evolving landscape of connecting communities with the families and residents they serve. So today we have a special guest, Tess Quinn, a registered nurse with over 15 years of experience and the senior living advocate at Senior Living Specialists Chicago. Tess brings a unique perspective to our show, combining her extensive nursing background with her passion for helping families navigate the complex world of senior living transitions. So we'll be discussing the importance of empathy, active listening, and thoroughness in providing transparent, unbiased advocacy services. So Tess will share her insights on the challenges families face and how her personal and professional experiences shape her approach to finding the right community for older adults. So welcome to the show, Tess. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great.
And
so thank you for joining us today. So Tess, I want to start with a little bit about your background. It's interesting because you have this, the nursing side. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that's shaped your approach to senior living transitions and what are senior living transitions?
I'd be happy to. Thank you for asking. So I grew up in a healthcare setting with personally with a sibling who is ill and is no longer with us, as well as other family members who have had cognitive decline and other diagnoses. So from a personal perspective, it's something I've always been interested in learning more about. So became a registered nurse in 2009. Began my career in an inpatient hospital setting, neurosurgery, neurology, endocrinology, and orthopedics. From there, I transitioned to surgical services, which I felt helped me bring what I had learned from the inpatient hospital setting and more comprehensive acute setting. I then stepped into leadership roles in working with patients and families in, again, a hospital setting, learning about their care plans, their concerns, bringing this feedback back to the teams to help kind of raise awareness on, increasing quality care, maybe streamlining some processes, training the trainer. And then I began working with the aging population in 2015, where I was in multiple roles, managing a wellness center and independent living, their pool of certified nursing assistants, bringing care into the home, as well as assisting with the nurses. And then I stepped into a role that allowed me to represent assisted living and memory care, specifically being the only clinical one on the team, as I did find that making that transition to assisted living and memory care is often healthcare driven. Is because of an event that served as a catalyst for having to make that decision. And so more recently stepped into a role of a senior living advocate with Senior Living Specialists Chicago, which is very similar to what I was doing, except on a broader scale. So instead of representing a specific community, what I say is I represent the community, and I bring them to multiple community options where appropriate.
What do you think inspired you to move from that clinical setting to more senior living advocacy?
Well, as I made the decision to make all those moves, I continued to reevaluate what was a common theme. And that for me, hands down, always from the beginning, 17 years ago, is education. I find that education is empowering. By empowering individuals, they're making educated decisions that they feel better about the decision that they're making. So that face-to-face, working through difficult times with families, relationship building, and always having that base of education has always been a passion of mine, which I've been able to do in all these different roles I've had.
So you were talking about working specifically with memory care and assisted living. I mean, do you find that families tend to know that that's kind of like the level of care that their loved one needs and is ready for? Or do you feel like I've heard kind of like both sides of it. Like sometimes that's the case, and a lot of times it's almost like the family's like the enabler, right? Like they're the one that doesn't think their loved one is ready for that or needs that yet. So how does that typically work for you?
I wouldn't say like majority is one or majority is the other.
Yeah.
I've seen all of that. You know what? Change is met with resistance. So any sort of change, especially a move, downsizing, selling the house, getting affairs in order, it's daunting.
It's a lot.
So what I find to be the most helpful is listen to what is the circumstances currently, understand, and this would be part of my intake process, understand healthcare needs, what brings them joy, geographical preferences, budget, what have you, all these things that go into it. And then kind of help them paint that picture, and give them options where options are available. Thinking ahead also is helpful, I think. If they've experienced falls, if the home they've lived in for 30, 40, 50 years, I see commonly, that's hard to move from. But if the laundry's in the basement, we've already experienced falls, I tend to be extremely transparent, respectfully. And I think that that's usually well received. And we say, I kind of explain how, in the event there's one more fall, that one bad fall, this is what that could potentially look like. Right now you have options. If something happens, you no longer have options. Mm-hmm. So what is, how important is that risk? Let's prioritize, I know the house is very important to stay in. So what would that look like? Do you want to add in home care? That's what this would look like. So again, just kind of diving deep into those details, into those options, I think kind of helps them realize, all right, you know what? We don't want it to be a coulda, woulda, shoulda situation is what I call it. And sometimes, when that does happen, everyone had good intentions, and then it's about helping them, meeting their needs where they're at then, so again, going on that journey with them. But, a lot of times the adult children, I find that might be a little bit more open to it than the parent. Or another thing I experience is when, significant others don't age at the same rate. So one is completely independent, and their significant other requires, activities of daily living assistance, or even has cognitive decline. There's guilt associated with that. They don't want to make a change, put them somewhere, but they don't want to go somewhere because it doesn't apply to them. That's when, again, you explore those options and you take the same approach. But that's also something I see that's quite common.
I think an unfortunate circumstance a lot of times too is people waiting too long, right? Like they kind of see the writing on the wall, but they don't, and like maybe they could have been a good candidate for assisted living or something like that, but then something else happens. Like that happened with my grandmother. She ended up falling and breaking her hip, and it was like there were like multiple red flags way before that had happened, and nobody really just like picked up on it because we didn't know,
Meeting that
first
with
experience.
Meeting that empathy, I think, is what's critical in my role, is because instead of, well, told you so, I mean, that's not helpful. That's not
no one wants to hear that.
No, and maybe, in the family dynamics, that is what's going on, right? Family dynamics always plays a part as well. And so it's acknowledging that, yes, maybe options now are different. Assisted living, they're no longer a candidate for, and kind of finding that silver lining. We don't want to look into assisted living because they'd be doing them a disservice. Now we need to be looking into, XYZ. So again, it all comes down to that common theme of education. But yes, you try to, when you see that writing on the wall, try to, again, bring that transparency, bring that honesty to, this is, potentially what could happen. And in the event that happens, this is what that would look like. I do think it's human nature, right? We don't respond to something until maybe something bad happens. And then then it's easier to apply. Okay, now let's look into assisted living because we got hurt, So I think that's a normal part of the process.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that right now. I mean, my parents are in their mid 70s, and like my dad, they've got 3 flights of stairs that they walk up and down every day.
Wow.
The bedroom's upstairs, their office is downstairs in like the basement area, and then they have the main level, right? So like they're constantly going up and down. Like my dad's got this whole system. He's like, well, once I'm down for the day, he's like, that's it. He's like, I don't go back up the stairs until bedtime, essentially. So like in his mind, he's like, I'm only really using the stairs once. So like, it's not that big of a deal that I've got these 3 flights of stairs to go up and down. And I'm just like, this is one of those situations where like, it's a difficult conversation to have because I know at some point, there's going to be a fall or a slip or, something. And, he's already mentioned that my mom's having difficulty, like she's had difficulty getting up and down the stairs, like mobility issues. So I'm like, okay, we need to really seriously start thinking about making some changes. But they also live across the country in New Jersey and I'm in California. So I don't see it. I don't know how bad it is. Right. So like there's that too. And I just have to kind of take their word for it.
Well, that's why sometimes the holiday season can be a busy time or directly after the holiday season because people see their families and they think, whoa, this is a little bit of a change. Also, when you say that, though, I see this as, again, very common, kind of making adjustments to making what you have right now work. What the concern there is when you start seeing those adjustments and you start seeing isolation. They're not going out as much. Maybe they're also isolated because the more they're around people, the more conversations they have, the more evident it is there is an issue. So that's also, I would say, something to look for. Again, very common. But also, again, I'm going to keep repeating myself. Education, I think oftentimes the anticipatory anxiety gets the best of most. And also just I like to debunk myths. A lot of times when I give talks, it's a lot of raising awareness and debunking myths. Like, they just kind of say it's a nursing home. It's like, well, hold on. No. It's not their way or the highway. They think they're giving up everything. Sure, the scenery will be different. Perhaps it is, a downsize. If they're not already living in a smaller condominium, let's say, 3 flights of steps. Yes, it would be a downsize for your parents.
For sure.
That's a hard pill to swallow. But everything else, saying this doesn't have to change. If you go to this church or you like this restaurant, those things don't have to change. So I think everything's going to change. So again, I think it's maintaining their expectations by raising awareness, giving them options where options are available, and kind of showing them it's just in regards to these certain things that pose a risk in your current setting, but all the other things don't have to change. I mean, I move people all the time into assisted living and they still drive, they're still playing golf, but they need some help with certain things, or their house is no longer serving them the way it's posing a risk. So I think sometimes talking through it is more helpful, and it's not as bad as people think it is, especially when they go tour. And then once they move, 9 times out of 10, the individual or the family say to me, I wish we would have done this sooner.
Obviously, depending on geographic location, but I mean, there's a lot of situations where someone can move out of their home, but still have access to all the same things they had before. They just, just still visit their favorite restaurants. They still have all their favorite stores right there. So it's just a change in location to simplify and downsize a little bit. I mean, my parents still live in the home that they built for my family, when I was a kid in 1987. So, it's like, we don't need the 4-bedroom house anymore. Like there's 2, they've got 3 guest rooms now. It's like, what are you doing?
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I've even helped, sometimes when you do make a move from out of state, I've helped in those situations. It's to move closer to the adult child or the grandchild, right? So just because maybe it's an unfamiliar, restaurant or library or, a senior group that you're getting together with, if that's what you did, let's say in Ohio, I'm making things up. Well, let me learn. Again, this is part of the intake process. It's not just healthcare driven. Let me learn a little bit about what brings you joy, what you like to participate in, and find that out where we're looking for a community.
Yeah.
So again, a change, but keeping things as consistent as possible. It doesn't all have to change. And I think oftentimes that is the mindset. The whole thing's going to change. And it shouldn't.
The 3 things that you kind of mentioned that were super important in your role were empathy, active listening, and compassion. I know I've kind of covered a little bit of that and given my scenario, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, so I've been doing that that's nursing 101, but I also just think being a human, someone who's trying to be helpful, 101, there is a difference between listening and active listening, gathering information, and then just spitting it out to communities to be like, hey, I think this person should move into your community. I think they're a good fit. not helpful. That is not a way that I choose to build relationships, build trust. It lacks compassion. Listening to what goes into why we're even exploring, whether it be proactively in the early stages or we needed this yesterday stage. Listening. There's a lot of social work involved in it, which is what makes it so meaningful and purposeful for me. And then kind of repeating back what they say to you so they know that you heard them. They know that you're going to honor their preferences. And then acknowledging some feelings that come along with it, this guilt, this worry, this concern, maybe frustration, with the family dynamics and this person's saying this, dad doesn't want this, but mom needs this, what have you. And then continuing to go on what I refer to as a journey with them. This could take years. This could take a couple weeks. Everything's different. So being able to have that flexibility. So in addition to empathy, compassion, I also, an active listening, I do like to add that key, like acknowledging that what they're going through is tough. Not just taking the info and doing something with it, but also transparency. Sometimes if appropriate, I share, my thoughts on it. Not so much opinions, but kind of, hey, I've experienced this. This is how, and this is what I found to be helpful. Not sure it'd be helpful to you. I do find that transparency, that personal touch is beneficial for all parties.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think they're coming to you because of your expertise. It makes sense. Just like us, they come to us for marketing, sales, and growth advice, right, in the industry, because they know that we've experienced a lot with a lot of different providers and industry specialists. So that's that level of insider information that you have, that makes that relationship so valuable. So I think your experience as a registered nurse, I mean, how does that change the dynamic when it comes to working with families?
By no means do I feel that an individual needs to be a registered nurse to do my role. However, there are individuals, ladies on my team with Senior Living Specialists Chicago that are social workers, certified dementia practitioners, what have you. And I do think, though, having clinical experience, 15 plus years of clinical experience, does assist the family, because oftentimes I see what I refer to as a spectrum, stops along the spectrum. And oftentimes one or two of those stops, maybe multiple times at that same stop, is hospitalization, rehabilitation at a skilled nursing facility, and not just I'm in my home and I need to move. So being able to, again, kind of meet them where they're at and really acknowledge and not just empathy, but sympathize, truly say, I can understand how that hospital admission was, going through the ED. Are you inpatient? Are you under observation? Working with teams that are consulting, maybe, you're on a med surge floor, but GI is, gastrointestinal is consulting, all these things that people, don't understand. And it's extremely overwhelming. I can kind of meet them where they're at with that and understand because I've worked in that setting. So I do find it to be helpful in building the relationship. And so they feel that they're understood. And so they kind of trust you more when it comes to taking those next steps of making such a big transition, either from hospitalization to skill to a community, back home, what have you.
Do you find that most people that you work with have already kind of, I don't want to say exhausted all options, but like they're coming to you because they've tried to go the route of doing it themselves and now they're frustrated and they need help? Or is it more that you're like the first step along the way?
So again, I've had both. I've had people, what I hear almost weekly is, I wish I would have known there was someone like you sooner.
Yeah.
So that is actually something that personally I have really kind of looked into more, is working and meeting these families when they're in that hospital setting almost, or maybe before an event happens. That's usually not the case, right? Something has happened to kind of prompt the conversation. But for example, if someone's in the hospital setting, based on their, let's say, injury, they're going to require skilled nursing, short-term rehab for, physical therapies and such. Instead of bringing me in when you have a discharge date in 7 to 10 days, which of course I'm happy to help with, it is useful to bring me in that hospital setting, knowing that you're going to go to skilled. Let's start the conversation. Let's get 1 or 2 tours in throughout that process. So when that discharge date does come, it's not this kind of chaotic situation. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but that would be an ideal situation. It doesn't happen as often as I would like it. Again, I think it goes back to what we discussed. Sometimes these things, events, if you will, act as a catalyst and prompts the need for action. And some people I've had, families reach out to me that are proactive. They have a diagnosis. It's not impacting their health just yet or, substantially. And they said, I see the writing on the wall. Let's start talking about this conversation. I don't see that as much, but I think it's helpful. The earlier you have the conversations, the better. But, having those conversations with the loved one is tough, especially if they're not open to it. So I also provide guidance about that. It's not just give me your intake information. I'm going to tell you what community, this is more like, okay, we haven't even talked about this with our loved one.
What are the common challenges that you have when facing that transition for a loved one? And how does that?
You have some families that have 2 or like 10 communities already. And they're bringing you in. Like, I didn't like any of them. I was like, okay. So that's where that thorough intake process comes in, where I touch on healthcare, social, emotional, as well as other preferences, geographical, financial, budget, what have you. You can Google these places. There's multiple options, but I'm able to streamline that process, put them in touch with the people that they should be, touching base with, facilitating the tours. I go on the tours with them. If they'd like. If not, I give them a list of questions they don't have to ask, but think about asking. Some questions perhaps might prompt another question that they might have. Things that they'll think to ask about longevity of staff, things of that nature. So again, kind of more coaching them through it. But I do think that it can be challenging when you're doing all that in a kind of a crisis situation, a mode, like something's happened. So I suppose my advice is have the conversations, sooner rather than later. But the truth is that doesn't happen often. It's majority of the time, understandably so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's got to be tough. I mean, I can't imagine trying to weigh options. And then there's obviously going to be things that slip through the cracks when you're like trying to think about what are all the things that I need to consider when I'm trying to find the right community for my loved one, so like having someone like you who can come in and not that you're not emotionally attached to the situation, but like you have empathy, you understand the situation they're in, but you can also think objectively about what they need to consider. Here are the key points that we want to make sure that our loved one has XYZ covered, and then also like that the facility also has these other things that they're going to need, and you're able to do that for them. So that's pretty great.
I don't know how anyone could possibly know what questions to ask, what the different types of communities are, what level of care, how to go about booking a tour. Can I just walk in, working with their schedule? It's always nice to have, I always refer to myself as a free set of hands. This is a complimentary service. I'm just here to help and shed some light maybe on things that maybe you're unaware of or you didn't think to ask. So when I do, going back to your question about when if a family comes in, some are just getting started. Then you have ones that toured multiple communities. So in those situations, I do say, tell me what communities you have toured. What were your thoughts? Why, what did you like? What didn't you like? And that helps me kind of pinpoint. I hear things. And again, identify those common themes where I'm able to say, okay, knowing that, have you thought about this? So again, it's just kind of working as a team. What people don't realize, perhaps, who may be in my role, and this is what I use. Again, going back to the question about how is it helpful, my nursing background, how is that helpful, is they are a resource. The family is a resource to me. They know their loved one best.
Yeah.
Why would I not utilize that? I'm not thinking I'm the expert. I'm going to tell you what to do. This is what's right or what's wrong. Absolutely not. Do I know more perhaps about a certain topic or community or what have you than they do? Sure. And they know more about their loved one than I do. So again, working as a team, providing that level of education, but of course that level of support on what I refer to as their journey.
Yeah. The education piece is huge, I think, and just like gathering information, because I know from our side, like from the marketing and advertising side, like the senior living providers we work with, I mean, we do our best to like create a landing page for each community that's super easy to navigate and understand all the options that are available. If you multiply that, like you said, by like 10, if they've looked at 10 different communities, like how do they know? Like are they going to create a matrix, a spreadsheet, and like put all the features and be like, okay,
I have met
how do
people
these
like
stack
that.
up? Yeah.
You know, I have met that. I love the spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, no, that is not what happens majority of the time. And it's
Yeah.
like, was that the place that had that thing, or was it this place? You know, it's not productive when you go. So what I do, how I streamline the process is, as I stated before, there are multiple options. So this kind of sounds crazy sometimes when I say to people, I'm going to send you, based on the information you've given me, I'm going to suggest 2-3 communities tops. You don't like those? This isn't my house. So I'm not offended. I can send more. There are more options. Of those options, these would be my recommendations, and this is why.
Yeah.
And we go from there. 99% of the time, they choose one of the 3 communities. Sometimes they tour just 1 or 2. I do always suggest touring at least 2, because you want to absolutely for cross comparison. But that's really all it takes if you have a thorough intake process and you have a good understanding. There's nothing wrong with, 4 or 5 options also, sometimes that also helps the family to feel like they did their due diligence, they really looked into it, and that's fine too. But 10 plus like that, unless you have an Excel spreadsheet, and even then it is almost counterproductive, and it actually makes the situation that's already overwhelming even more. Yeah. You can't tolerate it.
Do you have a set list of communities that you typically recommend, or are you willing just to work with any community that seems like it would be the best fit for that particular resident?
Any community. It'd be doing them a disservice, in my personal opinion, to stick to only specific ones. Now, when the family is very specific about their geographical preferences, and I have that happen, understandably so. If it's more convenient for the loved one, their family, their friends, then they'll visit them more. Sure, it makes sense. But when I'm not afraid to say, listen, I know you wanted to stay kind of here. However, there is a community I do think checks most of the boxes. Are you willing to, again, this is where that transparency comes in, honoring your preferences while also raising awareness that if you do you mind 15 or 20 more minutes west, this is what that would bring, Again, that comes down to the education, and they're usually very open to that, while also still looking at the ones that they prefer. I even have families come up to me that I didn't contact them. I was talking to my neighbor who has a mom who lives at this community and they like it. What are your thoughts on that? That's why I say, if you got a personal kind of referral, if you will, from someone else, let's take a look, and then I say, also, I would suggest these, but no, I think you'd be doing them a disservice if I only stick to certain ones. But it's been lovely not only building relationships with families, but the communities. It's been a wonderful experience, meeting all the different representatives and their executive directors and meeting their nurses. It really, each community is very unique from one another, even if they're the same company. That doesn't mean they're all the same. So you combined all that knowledge with the circumstances of the individual in need, family, and then the preferences. It's someone asked me one time if what I do is redundant. Absolutely not. It's never.
No, it's so every situation's different and unique for sure. Getting to know the family, and then getting, like you said, getting to know the actual communities and the directors and and everybody else on their staff. I think that's a really special experience. And then creating those personal experiences with people.
You don't mind, Jerry. I think that kind of going into a different angle of that is actually that approach is what makes Senior Living Specialist Chicago and smaller concierge type advocacy services like ours. It kind of helps us stand out from maybe a larger agency where it isn't a phone call into more robotic is what I would refer to it.
Yeah.
An individual in need, right? A phone call, an intake process. Here's the communities. There's so much more that goes into that. Now, then someone finds that helpful. That's wonderful. Ours is multiple phone calls, per the family's preference. Sometimes there's families that are a little bit more straightforward. This is what I need. I give them, some options. It works out for them. But I'd say it's usually much more involved in that. Multiple touchdowns, touring with them, a lot more with all due respect, kind of hand holding, very personalized concierge experience, which I think helps us stand out versus just kind of, again, kind of checking the boxes. This is an individual who, had a job or interests all their life. They were a mother. Understanding that all of these little, details really plays a part in finding, I mean, that's the definition of streamlining a community search, or even providing them with referrals to home care companies, elder law attorneys. All that plays a part.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what helps us stand out, is that personalized, very detailed approach.
I mean, Chicago is a pretty big area. So what's the actual scope of your focus? Like, how far out do you typically go?
Yeah. So what's great about, I do believe that, especially larger agencies, you're assigned territories. What's great about Senior Living Specialist Chicago and other small concierge advocacy services is we are not. I'm not expected to make X amount of dollars a month or X amount of phone calls a day. It's not like a mill like that. It's more meeting the needs where they're at. So although we have contracts throughout Chicagoland, throughout the state of Illinois, we tend to, focus on where the needs are. So a lot of times, my primary clientele perhaps is in my area, because so oftentimes the community member likes to work with another community member who knows the area, especially when they want to stay in the area. But we have team members throughout, Illinois. And so it's not territorial. It's more, and if someone's helping someone who actually lives out my way, it's not this competition feeling. It's actually camaraderie, calling each other and being
nice.
Like, hey, I got someone who's out your way. What do you think? Is this place, would you recommend this place? So it's team approach, because who benefits from that? The individual in need. And so it's never losing sight of that value of that's the purpose that we're serving. That's our role, and putting all that other gobbledygook to the side.
I think that's great. I recently just recorded a podcast that was talking about that, about how like we really need to keep our eye on the prize, and the prize is helping the individual find the best place to call home. Like that's it. Like there's nothing else that matters,
Exactly. I think sometimes people can lose sight of that because as you know, we have an aging population. There's going to be a significant need. Everyone's talking about the baby boomers. I mean, these are my parents. This growing need. We're going to need all this. And I don't deny that at all. Absolutely. But sometimes people can be advantageous. So I'm trying to, one family at a time, serve with, Senior Living Specialist Chicago, doing good, honest work, because that's the only what I deserve.
What are some of the determining factors for what you would consider a good community to recommend versus one that's not? Like, how do you weigh that?
Well,
obviously different in different situations, but
Sure. I look at quality and staffing and the link between those two. One of my passions, I guess you could say, something I'm extremely interested in and find of great importance, is staffing effectiveness, staffing retention, camaraderie, culture, staff recognition. Because I do feel that if you have that, and that culture, that camaraderie is strong, processes in that community are streamlined, and who benefits from that? The individuals residing there. If they're happy coming into work, if they feel supported, my guess is, in theory, response times to those call lights are faster. The quality isn't lacking, versus trying to fill, trying to get a body in there to fill this shift. Usually that doesn't go very well. Often, I understand sometimes you have to use agency staff. Someone who calls in, it's the holiday season, people are on vacation. There are circumstances, like you said. But overall, if you have a strong team there, especially one that boasts a lot of longevity, I do think that usually then you talk to the residents, and they oftentimes go hand in hand. There's, again, a theme there, that it's a good community, and everyone's happy, from professional to the person, the individual living there.
Yeah. I don't know if it was you that I had this conversation with prior or someone else, but we were talking about that they typically look at, like, to not count out the older community. It's
That
like
was me.
yeah, okay. That's like the long, like you were saying, like the older the
Yeah.
community was, typically they matured, right? Like they have a more
Right.
steady, stable staff, and like if you that new building, the new shiny bright building that has all brand new staff, like they haven't built that culture internally yet, so that makes
That
sense.
doesn't mean that the new communities, let me clarify. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean that newer
yeah,
communities are, don't go there because
yeah,
it's a mess. No, no,
right,
no. But a lot of times when people say, I want only a new community because they're cleaner, right? And I say, totally understand. Let me give you some recommendations, but something to think about here. A
yeah,
lot of times with older buildings, they've made their mistakes. They have an older team. However, you know what? I can put my foot in my mouth because sometimes the older buildings, you go there and maybe they're going through a turnover. So it is, but an older, established facility, but they've maybe had some turnover with staff. So I guess it is, it kind of comes in waves. I just wouldn't rule out a community because it's old,
right.
just because of the look of it. Old doesn't mean dirty, I guess.
Yeah,
I suppose I
yeah.
could say.
That's good. That's a good way to put it. So when working with families too, I mean, how do you ensure like you've gathered all the information without overwhelming the family? And it's probably like a fine line, and like it's probably different for each family depending on their situation.
Yeah. It is. Every family's different. Some want to dive deep. Some just answer the questions that you're asking. In those cases, you understanding the healthcare needs first and foremost, because those can be qualifiers or disqualifiers for certain communities. Do they have ostomy care? Are they a two-person assist? These are things that will help with me streamlining the search. So
Okay.
healthcare, the social, emotional, geographical preferences, and then, of course, budget. Things that go into that. Are they a veteran? Do they have long-term care insurance? Okay. So if you have that and it's pretty thorough, I'm, again, able to ask the questions that need to be asked without being robotic, touching on what matters, listening to them if they want to dive a little deeper and share more information. Because, again, information is power. It really is helpful for me to help them. And then once you have that, some questions might trickle in which case you're building a relationship with them. You can kind of keep touching. You're going to want to keep going back and having conversations with them anyways.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be a long conversation. That initial 20, 30 minutes. But I'll tell you, some people like to talk on the phone. It helps them kind of work through the process of these concerns that they're having, this anticipatory anxiety, I call it. So happy to be on the phone as long as needed. But I usually say the intake process itself, 20 minutes. I ask the specific questions that helps with that search. And if questions pop up along the way as we start our conversations regarding specific communities, then it's nothing but helpful then.
Yeah. And as an advocate for the family, I mean, there's no fee that they have to pay to work with you, right?
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So, I mean, if a family is not, how do you support families that might not be ready for a transition yet?
Well, that's a lot of people. I mean, who's ever,
Yeah.
it's only a few times I've had someone say, all right, I have to move. I'm sick of eating by myself. My laundry's down in the basement. Enough, It doesn't happen very often. So again, it's just, for me, it's again, fine line. It's very sensitive. Once you build that relationship and you have that initial intake, perhaps you've made some recommendations, whether it be communities, home care, companies, elder law attorneys to get their affairs in order, and you understand what boxes need to be checked, potentially, before a move, and then some information surrounding the move, then you keep touching back. Not every day. I'm not breathing down anyone's neck. That is not what's helpful. The goal is to always be helpful. So again, I think it depends on the person. I have someone who likes to talk to me every day. Great, I'm here. Let's talk. But then some people every, week or two, you touch base, especially after they tour community. Of course, you want to follow up. What was their impression? That helps me understand maybe more about the community from someone else's eyes. So again, just kind of consistency is key. You don't just pop in and out as you please. That's, again, not helpful. And that doesn't provide the support that I think is extremely important throughout potentially making a transition.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when it does take longer, I set the expectation. It's always maintaining expectations and say, okay, it seems like if I understand correctly, this is where we're at. How about I check back within a couple of weeks, And everyone's usually very agreeable.
Yeah.
I said, in the interim, though, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So again, it's constantly making myself available.
That's great. I love that you guys do that. So for a future perspective, I mean, how do you think the industry can better support older adults and their families? I know we're in the midst of a major boom in terms of, the older population growing, and housing is going to become challenging. Staffing is going to become challenging. What's your advice to families?
So advice to families would be, it's never too early to have the conversation. You can't have the conversation and in that conversation be like, and here's a list of places that I'm, they're going to shut down.
Yeah.
So have the conversation, even if it's for 5 minutes, and maybe the individual or individuals is not having it. That's fine. Wait a couple weeks, wait a week, have the conversation again. It takes time. So never underestimate just how long the process could potentially take. Again, I've had situations where somebody moves within less than a week. Great. That's absolutely fine. But majority of the time, it's about having those tough conversations. So talking with me about how to go about having those conversations, kind of what angle to take, how to share your own feelings without overwhelming the individual that perhaps, they're helping out, or their spouse, what have you. But also looking into resources that are available to them in their own community. For instance, in my area, we have Aging Care Connections, Interfaith Community Partners. We've got Meals on Wheels. We have, transportation. They get talks. The park districts are wonderful. So maybe we're not transitioning right now, but are we utilizing the resources that are available to us in our immediate community? And it does provide a sense of support, adult daycares, if that's appropriate. So sometimes checking those boxes helps an individual or family feel better about making such a huge transition versus going from 0 to 60,
Yeah.
So looking into that while having that conversation, keeping that consistency, checking some boxes, let's get our affairs in order, still talking about it, then kind of helps when you take that step. It's not this huge leap,
Yeah.
But sometimes, you know what? It's going to feel like a huge leap either way. But at least, you've looked into a few things that helps you feel good about that decision.
And what about the industry overall? What would be your advice to the industry, how they can better support older adults and their families?
So continuing to provide these services to the community members, I think, before, they need to move to a community. Within an actual community, really focusing on that staff. I'm a huge advocate for in-services. As you stated, things are constantly changing. People are living longer. How are we adapting? Sometimes you can't. I'm all about being consistent, but also sometimes you got to step out of that consistency and change it up, have a new consistency, if you will, So raising awareness, providing in-service, providing staff recognition, you can make it fun. So much of what we do is so serious and can be heavy. Touching base with them, supporting them, because guess who they're supporting? The people that are living there, So they truly do go hand in hand. So I think keeping a pulse on what we're experiencing out in the community, and then raising awareness with staff, having them be knowledgeable with that so they feel prepared, and then the residents reap the benefits.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great advice. I love that. So Tess, as we wrap up, how can our audience stay connected with you and learn more about your work, or just keep this important conversation going?
Well, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I had mentioned to Jerry before, life does not happen between 9 to 5. So I have conversations, well, at least my life doesn't, right? I have conversations with people after hours. People have jobs, the sandwich generation, which I'm a part of, where you have young children, perhaps. A career while you're also, caring for aging parents. So 9:30 at night, having conversations, 7 o'clock at night after they put the kids to bed, what have you. Happy to have that conversation. Again, I think that's what makes Senior Living Specialist Chicago so unique, is we're able to kind of meet you where you're at, be flexible, be accommodating, because life is not. So, feel free to reach out via text, email. And Jerry, feel free to share that information with our listeners. I'm happy to always answer any questions that there is, or provide any resources that would be helpful.
Okay. No, that's great. Yeah, we'll definitely put all of your info into the show notes so people can reach out and make contact with you. And So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Tess Quinn for joining us and sharing her valuable insights. Thank you so much into the world of senior living transitions. It's inspiring to see how dedicated professionals like Tess are making a difference in the lives of older adults and their families, ensuring they receive the care and support they deserve. If you want to stay connected with Tess and learn more about Senior Living Specialist Chicago, be sure to follow her on LinkedIn and check out her social media profiles. And you can also visit seniorlivingspecialistchicago.com. And of course, I'll make sure I put everything in the show notes for you guys. So as always, we hope you found this episode insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore the dynamic world of senior living marketing and sales. Also, this is a reminder that From Leads to Leases isn't just an audio experience, we're also a video podcast. So if you want to see the versions of our episodes, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify channels. So I'm Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth. Thank you for joining us on From Leads to Leases, where we're giving you all of these great senior living industry insights for free and asking nothing in return other than for you to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it useful. I'm truly grateful for your time and attention. Until next time, lead with strategy and with heart. Chat with you again soon. Thanks for tuning in. Explore more at ccrgrowth.com. At CCR Growth, we've developed the Senior Growth Innovation Suite to unlock an additional $1.5 million and up in revenue per senior living community within a year. We specialize in generating quality leads, expediting sales, and reducing acquisition costs. Let's connect soon.